Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I begin in the name of Allah, the God whose mercy is profound, whose kindness is forever. The Quran has thematic and structural coherence. That's what we have started talking about. And in the last two presentations, I mentioned a few examples to show that there indeed is coherence in the Quranic text in all its surahs, all chapters. Smaller surahs are coherent anyways, even apparently. Larger ones, they unfold their coherence on deeper reflection. And I try to impress upon this reality by giving a few examples. Now I move on to the next venture, which is to show that not just that the Quranic surahs, each one of them is coherent in its presentation, and all passages come together, gel together logically. The structure of the Quran all together has been designed in a manner that it too gives a very neat, impressive, in fact a very attractive look. What we find is that the Quran, 114 surahs of the Quran, except for 6 surahs, 108 surahs are designed to be 54 pairs. So it's 2 surahs together forming a pair are actually 108 surahs, and each pair has a certain definite subject topic distinct from topics of other pairs, and each surah of the pair is actually clarifying, emphasizing, or supplementing the major theme, the common theme of the 2 surahs in one way or the other. Like it happens in the case of pairs, in the case of partners. One partner contributes in one way and the other partner contributes in another different way, and the 2 together are able to complete the partnership, the reality of the pair. I'll give you a few examples. Obviously, it's examples that help in understanding what the basic idea is, and the theory is only proved when you show it in practice that that's how it's actually happening. So I'll give you 3 examples. One example of a Quranic pair is the surahs number 2 and 3, Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran. Both surahs are Madanan surahs. All surahs that are pairs belong to the same era, the same period. If there is one surah which is Meccan, its partner surah has to be Meccan as well, quite understandably. So Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran are Madanan surahs. One aspect of them being pairs is that both begin with Alif Lam Mim. You might say, what's so special about it? Well, the answer is that Surah Al-Fatiha does not begin with Alif Lam Mim, and the 4th surah, Surah Nisa, doesn't begin with Alif Lam Mim. There has to be something special that the Almighty decided that Surah Al-Baqarah and Ali Imran both begin with Alif Lam Mim. What it means is that the Almighty is actually declaring as if that, look here, these 2 surahs are similar. That's how I have designed them to be. Look at their ending. Both surahs end with a prayer. Surah Al-Baqarah, we know, Rabbana la tu'akhizna in nasina wa akhtana, Rabbana wa la tahmil alayna isran kama hamaltahu ala allazina min qablina, till the very end. As well as in Surah Al-Imran, what you find is that at the very end the Almighty is saying, Rabbana ma khalaqta haza batila subhanaka faqina azaban nar, Rabbana innaka man tudkhilin nara faqad aghzayta wa ma liz-zalimina min ansar. and so on. So what you find is that here again, the Almighty is suggesting a prayer that is to be prayed by believers. And it's obviously very significant. You see in the next two surahs, An-Nisa and Al-Ma'idah, and you find a completely different presentation. Both surahs are ending with what we might call a question-answer session, something unique to those two surahs. So, Al-Baqarah beginning with Alif Lam Mim, Al Imran beginning with Alif Lam Mim, Al-Baqarah ending with a prayer, Al Imran ending with a prayer, is obviously something that has to be for a reason. The third and probably the most important reason why they have to be understood as a pair is that their subject matter also seem to be very similar and obviously somewhat different as well. They are similar because they form a prayer. They are different because they're two different surahs. So they're two partners. In Surah Al-Baqarah, as well as in Al Imran, the first big part of the surah, and mind you, both surahs are very long surahs. Al-Baqarah, the longest surah, and Al Imran, no less. The first big portion, chunk of the surah is addressing the people of the book. The second part of the surah, both surahs, the second part is addressing Muslims. So, that in itself is again very remarkable. And that actually means that these two surahs are supplementing each other and doing the same job, the same task. Now, where is the difference? When Surah Al-Baqarah begins to address the people of the book, it addresses more particularly one group amongst the people of the book, the Jews, the children of Israel. When Al Imran addresses the people of the book, it addresses more particularly Nasara, whom we call now the Christians, the believers in Jesus Christ in particular. Not that I'm claiming that the two surahs are not addressing other groups, but their emphasis is quite clearly on their respective groups that they specialize in while addressing them in the first half. When it comes to the address to Muslims, what we find is that in the case of Al-Baqarah, the address to Muslims is primarily requiring them to follow the Almighty's law, the Sharia, that has been revealed in Surah Al-Baqarah and mentioned in a logical sequence. One injunction, expectation, giving way to another logically, and to a third one in a way that they are all linked in a manner that there is a definite reason why one follows the other and the third one. So it's Sharia, which in particular has been presented in Surah Al-Baqarah in its second half when it is addressing Muslims. So obviously when the Almighty is addressing Muslims, He is requiring them to do in accordance with the Almighty's expectations. And one way of expecting them to follow His expectations, to follow His ideals that He has set forth for them, is to follow His law. In Surah Al-Imran, in the second half, where Muslims are being addressed, what you find is that there is no single Sharia rule that has been mentioned for Muslims to follow. There's no law that is required for Muslims to understand and to implement in their lives. Instead, what we find is that in Surah Al-Imran, the Almighty has utilized the incident of the Battle of Uhud, the second big battle that was fought between Muslims and the non-believers of Mecca in the 3rd century Hijrah, very close to Medina in Uhud. That's the name of the place where it was fought. This battle, unlike in the case of Badr, was a battle wherein the Muslims had to face real major setbacks. Some 70 Muslim soldiers, they were killed, they got martyred, and there were phases of the battle where the Muslims had to face difficulties. The Almighty has made use of that one particular incident to help Muslims realize, appreciate, where did things go wrong? Why did they go wrong? Who were the people who were to be blamed? What needs to be done to correct this attitude? And who are the ones who, despite all these setbacks and difficulties, behaved well, properly, and therefore they were the ones who pleased the Almighty. So it's more like a case study method, where there's a case of Battle of Uhud that's in the background, and there is call it a discussion taking place, which is clarifying as to why what happened actually happened and what are the lessons to be learned. Let's move on to the second pair. The second pair that I've chosen for discussion is the pair that it comprises of Surahs 65 and Surah 66. Surah 65 is Surah At-Talaq. Surah 66 is Surah Tahrim. This is another very interesting pair. Here what you find is that there are two extreme scenarios in a family life that have been discussed, mentioned. If you ask me what exactly is the central theme of both surahs put together as a pair, I would say that the central theme is that there should be a balance one must maintain while being a part of a family life. There could be two extreme scenarios. One scenario could be that there is so much of tension in family between husband and wife. They can't get together. And things have gone so bad that the husband is now considering the possibility of giving divorce, talaq. Even in that scenario, in that situation, the Almighty is mentioning in this surah that both husband and wife must behave. They must put check, control on their tempers, must not violate the Almighty's expectations. The lady, while the waiting period is going on, would not leave her husband's house, nor is the husband going to force her leave his house. And they're both going to behave and apply restraint. They are expected to be God conscious. Therefore, taqwa, ittaqullah has been repeated several times in this very brief surah. We move on to the next surah, the partner surah of Surah Talaq, and it's At-Tahrim, where the subject matter is that if things are extremely good, congenial in a household, in a family, the members of the family must make sure that that does not mean that they should move away from the Almighty's expectations. They should behave within the limits of the Almighty's boundaries that He has set forth for them to follow, to observe. So, for example, right at the beginning of the surah, in the very first verse, the Almighty is telling the Prophet, may Allah's mercy be on him, why is it that you are making certain things unlawful for yourself, which the Almighty has made lawful for you? Is it that you want to please some of your wives? Now, pleasing one's wife is a good gesture. That's what one is expected to do in a good, healthy family life. But obviously, the case of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, was different. He was the model for all Muslims, And if he was to decide that he's not going to make use of certain things, certain edibles, which the Almighty has otherwise made lawful for everyone, some Muslims might be led to believe that probably, if not completely prohibited, it's not something desirable to be consumed. So obviously it is not a befitting behavior on the part of somebody who is the leader of all people, even if the intentions are very good, even if the idea is to please family members. The Almighty asked the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, to not make certain edibles unlawful for himself, even when they are lawful. So in other words, the atmosphere of the house is good. The relationship is so caring and loving that there is a likelihood that something is done that might go against the expectations of the Almighty, which the Almighty has prevented from happening. That's why the same surah, we move on, is telling us that believers, قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا, save yourselves and your family members from the hellfire. That is, don't make your atmosphere in your household, in your family, so relaxed that people are not taking God's religion seriously, and because of your attitude of leniency, relaxation to the family members, they are likely to go away from the right path. So you've got to maintain a balance. So what we see in these two surahs is the fact that both of them are talking about certain aspects of family life, but those aspects are actually talking about two different extremes. And this is what makes them put together one very interesting pair. The third and the last example in my presentation that I'm going to give of a surah pair is the last two surahs of the Quran, Suratul Falaq and Suratul Nas. Both surahs put together have been given one name, Mu'awwidhatayn, the two surahs through which we seek refuge in Allah from certain evils. So imagine that their theme, their subject matter is so close to each other that they have been given one name. Both surahs begin with words Qul a'udhu bi Rabbi, which obviously is something very significant. Obviously the question arises when both are seeking refuge in Allah the God from certain evils, then why are they not forming one surah? Why were they divided into two different surahs? The answer is that in Surah Al-Falaq, Surah number 113, the Almighty has taught a prayer in which we seek refuge in Allah from the evil that happens to be outside our personalities, in the outside world. While in Suratul Nas, the Almighty has asked us to seek His refuge from the evil that resides inside us. So, that's why there are two different surahs. But when you put them together, they become another very clear and impressive pair. So, in Suratul Falaq, what we say is, Qul a'udhu bi Rabbil Falaq. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of the one who emerges. Min sharri ma khalaq. He emerges, that is, he is the one who causes things to emerge. Darkness gives way to light, plants sprout from the soil, and so on. So he is Rabbul Falaq. Min sharri ma khalaq. From the evil of what he has created. وَمِن شَرِّ غَاسِقٍ إِذَا وَقَبْ. And from the evil of darkness when it overcomes, when it overspreads. وَمِن شَرِّ النَّفَّاثَاتِ فِي الْعُقَدِ, and from the evil of the blowers in knots, clearly referring to black magic. That's the way it's done. وَمِن شَرِّ حَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدٍ, and from the evil of the envier when he envies. And obviously, more particularly, it's Iblis, the Satan, who envied and who was jealous. When we look at Surah An-Nas, what we find is, again, the beginning is the same. قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ, say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind. Malikin Nas, the sovereign of mankind. Ilahin Nas, the God of mankind. Min sharril waswasil khannas, from the evil of the one who whispers and retreats. Al Khannas, the one who retreats. That's what Satan does. Allazi yuwaswisu fi sudurin nas, who whispers into the hearts of mankind, puts evil thoughts in their hearts. Min al jinnati wan nas, from among the jinn and men. So, both are doing the same thing. Both are described in the same style, but they're doing two different things. One is seeking refuge in God from the evil that resides in the outside world, and the other is seeking refuge in God from the evil that resides inside us, inside human personality, that is Satan, who whispers evil thoughts into the hearts of men. So that's another pair. As I said, 54 pairs are to be found in the Quran, and it's a fascinating journey of the Quran if you read the Quran with an understanding that there are surah pairs after surah pairs. There are 6 exceptions, and that in itself is a very interesting subject matter as to why certain surahs were designed to be exceptions. We've already seen that Surah Al-Fatiha is an exception, but there are other surahs that are exception too. 24th Surah An-Nur is an exception. 33rd Surah Al-Ahzab is an exception. Surah Yasin is an exception. 36th Surah Al-Hujurat, 47th Surah is an exception. Surah Waqia, 56th Surah is an exception. In the next presentation, I will mention the other aspect of the structural coherence in the Quran, which is the 7 surah groups. May the Almighty enable us to understand His book properly, and may He enable us to follow His religion as best as we can.